Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this week's lesson. We're going to be going over texturing and UV mapping this week. We're going to start with doing explaining what UV mapping is and what textures are and what they do to our models. At its basic form, textures are the different materials that a object that you would see in 3D space gives it its look, whether it's its color, any height or roughness to the object itself, whether it's metallic or reflective or non-reflective. All these things are controlled by the textures and a group of textures together as a material. So in Maya, as well as in Unreal Engine and most game engines, when you are assigning that look to a model, you are assigning a material to it, and the material contains all of the data that's necessary for um, the renderer to portray that on the model. So let's start with UVing. Well, actually, first let's start with, I'm going to drop a cube into our scene, and then I'm going to, let's make it kind of big, and we'll put it on the surface. All right. Let's talk about what a material is, and what you can do with it in Maya. So if I were to right click and go down here to the material options here, we can assign a new material. Maya uses Arnold materials as well as its own types of materials. You'll see different things: Phong, Lambert, Blinn. These are different kind of base materials. For the most part, we can stick with the Arnold's. The Arnold standard surface is the most basic one. So if I apply that here, you'll see that it's changed color, and you'll see that I also have a new tab in my attribute editor called Surface Material 1. Or sorry, that is our that is our group of materials, and where file pathing, we actually want the standard surface 1 tab. This tab now has a bunch of different options here. Go through this really fast because we're not going to get into this week, but next week I'll get deeper into kind of what all of these options mean. Base is its base color. So if I were to click on the color option here and choose red, now its base color is red. If we wanted to change the, let's go down here, it's changed the shade of that red, we can make it darker. And then if we wanted to change its, so this slider here under base is the weight of this layer. So basically how much of the color you'll see based against anything else on the material. So if it's at 1, you'll see 100% of the color, and if it goes down to 0, you'll see 0% of this color. You also have your specular, transmission, subsurface, coat, sheen, mission. All of these different things are different modifiers to your base material that you can mess around with, and it'll give you whether it's additional roughness or reflectiveness, shine. You can mess with those. We'll get it further into these next week. So right now we're just going to deal with base color. So if I wanted to say, let's just leave this as red for now. It's not super important that the base material that we use, for the most part, until you start getting into editing the materials or all the materials in Maya, you don't really have to worry too much about this. All right, so now that we've added a material to our cube and we've given it a color, and it's got a bit of that base shine that exists in it. What if we wanted to do something custom? What if we wanted to turn this cube into a die or a crate or something like that. Well, we need to work on its UV map. So cubes are pretty simple, and actually most or all of the primitive shapes are very simple because they all have the same UV map. Um, or I guess I should say each shape has its own specific UV map. So a cube is always going to have the same UV map as another cube um, if it's a primitive made in Maya. So what is a UV map? So let us start by going into our UV option menu here and go into UV editor. So when you get the open up your UV editor, you'll see the unfolded flat version of your cube. So you see our cube here, and this is what it looks like if you were to cut along its seams, cut along its edges, and flatten it out. It's a 2D representation of your model. If I wanted to, so we can, inside of this UV editor mode, if I go to face, and I'll try to make this as easy to see as possible. If I were to click on a face, you can see that it'll highlight that face as it is in the 3D representation. So while it might not be obvious one to one, you can kind of see based off of faces, and you can just shoot, like if you're working in a cube, for instance, if you want to know where in the UV map this is, you can click on the face here, and it'll show you in the UV editor. So what does a UV actually do? So a UV is a coordinate-based mapping. So what does a UV actually do? So a UV is, as I said, a 2D representation of your 3D object, and it's used to map where you want your material details to go. Basically, this allows you, if you have a UV map, allows you to take that map, paint whatever you want on it, and then attach it to the cube as a material, and that material will show up properly around the actual mapped faces of the object. So for this cube, if I wanted to say turn this into a crate, I could, on this UV map, paint on top of it a bunch of wood material or wood images and textures and stuff, and then apply that new image file to the cube, and based off of the dimensions of the UV, it will overlay onto the cube correctly. So with a basic UV map like this for a cube, it's not a lot that we have to really worry about when setting this up. However, when you get into more complex objects, which I'll show shortly, you really have to make sure that you adhere to a certain couple of things. So inside of this, and actually let me show you this as well. So I'm going to close down our UV editor. We're going to go over to our workspace up here. We're going to drop that down, and we're going to go to UV editing. So now it's going to give us a side-by-side of both our 3D object and our UV. That's good. That will help us visualize things a little bit better. So inside of our UV editor, we have a grid that's labeled from 0 to 1 on the y-axis and 0 to 1 on the x-axis. This is our u and our v. And it's a similar coordinate system, even though it's not called x and y. This will tell us anything that's painted along this section of, let's say, the 0.8 to 1 section on the y will show up in that coordinate on the 3D object. And when we have our actual flat UV of our shape, it will show us exactly where on that graph we need to lay out the image to be able to have it show up in the material. What we're going to do is using this UV. So the first thing that we have to do before we want to edit a UV is we need to export this out. So first thing that I want to do is I want to create a project folder for our cube. This is a good idea in general to be creating a project folder for your Maya projects. But it'll help us sort kind of the UV maps, the materials, the textures, and the actual Maya files themselves into one place that we can find them. So I'll just do this really quickly. We're going to go to File. We're going to go down to Project Window. And then now we have this window up here. We are going to make a new project. We're going to call this Cube UV as just a placeholder. And then this is going to give us our location. I'm going to leave it where it is in projects, but if you have a specific location on your computer that you like to save these, click on this folder, navigate to it, and select it. And all of these different things are the different names of the folders it's going to create. So if we click Accept, and then we go to Save this scene, you'll see here on our directory that I am saving in my Cube UV scenes folder. You can see on the left side here, we have a current project is Cube UV, and these are all our folders for that. So if I looked at, say, our images folder, which doesn't have anything, our source images folder, which has different paint texture, I don't think there's anything by default in here. This is where Maya knows how to, or where Maya knows to separate your files as you save them in your project, and allows you to get to them very quickly and easily, and also allows you to package them up and send them to other people so they can get to them quickly and easily. So we're just going to put this as, we're going to call it Cube Scene, and we're going to save it in our Scenes folder. Okay, so now that we have our project all saved up, let's export our UV map. So we'll go in our UV editor, we'll hit Image and UV Snapshot. First thing to note is the file name. It'll tell you what file path it's actually saving everything to, which you can tell it's my Cube UV project images, and then out UV is the name of the file. It's important just to note that your UV snapshots will be saved in your images folder in your project. I'm going to leave it as out UV because that's easiest. Next, let's look at our image format. So Maya uses an if format by default to make it easier for us to edit these images in editing software like Photoshop. We want to stick to either a PNG, a Targa, or a TIFF format. I'm going to use TIFF because it's a little bit more robust of a format than like a PNG. And now let's go into our size, our X and Y. This is pixel size, and this is, we always want to use power of 2 sizing when we deal with anything, texturing, anything with materials. It is, computers use power of 2 to process things a lot faster. So what we want to do is to make sure that our UV map is always at a power of 2, which if you're not aware, or if you haven't heard of power of 2, it's anything that is multiples of 2, so 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, so on and so forth. By default, it sets it at 2048 by 2048, which is 2K. It's also known as 2K. If we wanted to do 4K, that would be 4096. And then if we wanted to do 1K, that's 1024. So when you hear somebody talk about a 1K texture, it doesn't mean it's 1000 by 1000 pixels. It's 1024 by 1024. And 4K is 4096 by 4096. 4K is usually the upper limit for most things that you'll do in texturing. I've used 8K textures before. They're very large and unnecessary, so we don't need to worry about that. And for most things, unless it's like a hero character, unless it's like a hero character, we don't really need to do um, anything higher than 1K. So let's go with 1024 by 1024. We'll save it at 1K. And the only other thing that we want to worry about is our edge color. So if we wanted to change our edge color to make it more visible for us, you can do that here. I guess I can do, let's do a pink. Maybe that'll make it a little bit easier to show up in the editing process. So then we're going to click apply and close. Oh, I need to actually select my object. That would help. Make sure that your object is selected and then click apply and close. Okay, so now, so it has saved. You can see down here, it says that it's saved in images, cube UV images. So if I were to go into my, there we go, my Maya folder, and we go projects, cube UV, images, there it is. I want to, the next thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to show you how you can hand edit your textures and add them to an object. So here, I'm just going to open this up with Photoshop. Any image editing software that works with the file formats are totally fine. Photoshop is arguably the most powerful, and you can also use GIMP or anything like that that uses a layer system. It's a lot easier to use as a layer system. But it's opened up our image here, and I'm going to add a fill layer. I'm going to make it black-ish. That's good. So now you can see the lines here are our UV map, which means that we can do whatever we want onto this file and save it as its own image, and then we can transfer that image to its text to the actual material in Maya. We don't want to ever edit on the, and I'm going to rename this real fast so that I can tell. This is the UV map layer. We don't want to edit on top of the UV map layer itself because we don't want that to show. We don't actually need the UV map to show on our material. So if we add a new layer, click in the little new layer button here, and we'll work on this layer. So if you haven't used Photoshop before, the layer makeup is basically everything is layered on top of each other. So the topmost layer in your layers panel is the one that you'll see on top of everything else, and it goes down. So for instance, this UV map is on top of my color fill layer, which means you'll see it on top of the color. But if I were to move it to below the color fill layer, now it's gone because that entire color fill is on top of it. So anything that we paint on this top layer here will go on top of our UV map. We're not going to do anything too crazy here. I just wanted to kind of show you how this transfers. So I'm going to grab a brush tool, make a much smaller brush tool. Sure. I should probably reset my brush tool. And let's grab color. Let's grab a green. Sure. And I'm going to draw just some numbers here. On my layer. And for some illustration of what's actually happening, we're going to draw outside of our UV map. So basically, anything in this map that is actually inside of our UVs will be on our material. Anything that we paint outside of our UV map will not show up. So right now, the only things that will show up in our UV map are the numbers inside of these cubes or inside of these squares, as well as the color fill because it's also filling inside of the squares. But if we were to save this as, and we'll save this in images as well, and we'll call this cube UV, and we will make it a Photoshop document, a PSD, and click OK. Okay, so now that we have our Photoshop file saved up and everything, we can go back over to our scene in Maya. We can leave our UV editing workspace, go back to General, and originally I gave this a basic Arnold standard surface. What I want to do now is, with the object highlighted, I want to assign a new material, go down to New Material, and this is going to give us this menu. And what we actually want on our material is, if we click on Arnold, we want an AI standard surface, which is going to give us an AI standard surface material. Yours will probably say 1. I did this earlier, and it's still in our editor somewhere, but that's okay. And we have very similar options here in our shader as we did previously. But one of the things that we've added is this little map button here. It's called a render node. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to render things on top of our UVs, like image files, textures. So what we want to do is we want to add an image, which is file. So we'll add a file that's called file1 for right now. And we want to find the image name. So we hit the folder here. The first place Maya is going to look is in our source images folder, and when our materials are finalized, we can place them here. But where we want to go is we hit up on the arrow here, go over to our images folder, and choose our Cube UV PSD. All right, so now that we've loaded this PSD into our attribute editor, you can see the sample here. You can see what we've done to our image, but it's not showing up on our cube. It's not rendering yet. So one of the things that we want to do, if we want to look at it, is you hit 6, and this will show our shaded display with all of our texture maps. So now you can see that we have created a texture on top of our cube, and it's mapped everything as it was in here. It didn't render anything outside of the actual UV map, which is good. Okay, so we have our cube here. This is a couple of things that we can change about this. If I unclick on it, you can see the lines created by the UV map. We don't want those to show up in our final texture. And also, I guess this too is upside down, so we can fix that. So let's go back into Photoshop. And the first thing that we're going to do to hide the UV map is just hide this layer. And then the second thing that we're going to do is choosing our top layer, just going to grab this and go to Edit, go to Transform, and rotate, and rotate it around. And done. We can also do some other stuff. Let's give it a color overlay, make it a different color. Now it's blue, make it a little bit easier to tell that it's completely different. I'm going to save this as a copy because call it 2 iteration is important. And now we go back into Maya, and we go back into our folder here, and we'll choose Cube UV2, and there you go. Now it's blue. There's no longer any UV mapping lines, and the 2 is the right way up as the rest of the faces. Basically, anything that you do in a Photoshop edit like this, using a UV map, can be added to the UV or to the material, and you can do that in all the different channels. So when you get really into deep material building and stuff, you'll want to create, you'll be creating maps for multiple different channels. Your base color, your specular, your normal map, your roughness, metallic, and those can all be added in through Maya. And this is a way to texture materials or texture objects in Maya, though there is also the other program that we're going to use, Substance Painter, which I'll be talking about in the next video. That does a lot of this heavy lifting for you with a nice graphical UI that allows it to be a little bit easier to do things in real time. The last thing I want to talk about for UVing is, this is a simple object. If you look at the UV editor for this, very simple. It's a cube. It's going to fold out in one way. But what if we had a, I'm going to save this, and what would happen if we had a more complex file? So I think I have them, because I have these these files not in actually, no, screw it. So what would happen if we say we took a new scene and we got a more complex object? So I'm going to import a file from my desktop here. It is, where's my, there it is. There's a couple of things that are wrong with this one, but it is more complex, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. I guess the first thing that I can do is I can change our material to make it a little bit easier to see. So let's change it to Lambert, so that we can see this a little bit better. And then also I want to go into modify. I want to center our pivot, because there we go. The pivot was very off on this. All right, so this one right here, as you can see, very complex, in that there's a lot of tries in here, a lot of angles and beveling and all sorts of stuff. There's also, it's round, it's a cylinder, cylindrical object. So we want to UV map this. What does this look like? Well, let's select it, and I'll go into our UV editing mode. And this is its current UV map. This is, for lack of a better term, a simpler, I wonder if I can make this a little bit easier to see. This probably might be easier. This is, for lack of a better term, the easiest way to unwrap this. Basically, what we did for this one is we found a seam along, and you can see the seam here along the side of the bottle, and then we created a seam along the neck of the bottle, and then this is a completely different object, so we made a seam around the top of the cap and then around the side of the cap, and then that's how it unfolded. So when you cut all of those seams and you unwrap it, you have the side of the bottle here. We have the, I think this is actually the bottom of the bottle, which is also its own part of the UV. That's been unwrapped there. The neck of the bottle, the cap, and the top of the bottle here. These have all been unwrapped and positioned in this way, just to make it easier to, this is the easiest way to map it out. Now, if we were to go into the thing I actually wanted to do, there we go. If we were to go into, let's look at our rocket that we made in the first part of class. If you look at this UV map, this is all over the place. And this we don't want to see. We don't want things overlapping, because when things are overlapping, if you're painting on, say, the cone part of the rocket, if you paint on top of that, you're also painting on top of the body, all of these different pieces, and we don't want to see that. So what we want to do is we always want to lay out our UVs in a way that they're not overlapping. You can do that manually. So for instance, if I were to use face mode, actually we can go into these tools here. If I click on this button, I think this is the one. This is our UV shells. Yes. So now it's highlighting our different UV shells, which is the actual pieces that have been unwrapped. And if I select that, I can then move it if I need to using the transform tool here, and we can slide it up and out of the way. You can scale it as well. So if we go to scale, and let's scale it down to 1. Oops. We can rotate it if we need to. We want to keep it inside of this 1 by 1 square. Otherwise, we have multiple map. Otherwise, we have multiple map files, and that's very complicated and not something that we want to deal with. But we would need to reorganize all of this in a way that it's all spread out. We don't really have time for that, and that sounds like very complicated work that I am not getting into in this course, doing it manually. So instead, we're going to use Maya's cool tools to help us. So if you go to our create, we can do this automatically. So let's click on the dialog box here, and I'll talk about this a little bit. This is just kind of your object or options for laying out your UVs, and it will calculate them automatically. So this planes how many different planes within the grid here we want to use, whether we want to optimize for less distortion or fewer pieces. So for less distortion, if there's a lot of complicated parts and it has to cut seams in different ways, you can get distortion when splitting that for the material itself, where you can possibly see cuts and things like that. Fewer pieces is limiting the number of actual UV shells that we have. Other stuff that we're going to want to look at is our layout. We want to make sure that we're stacking things in the bounding box, that they're not overlapping, and that we're scaling uniformly. And we can just hit project. Okay, so now that looks completely different to the original map. No, actually, hold on. That's also my fault because I want to select. There we go. So what we want to do is, I'll go through all this again. So what we do is we want to do this automatically. And the way that we do that is if we just highlight everything here, so we have it all selected, and go to create, open up the dialog box for automatic. I usually want to optimize for fewer pieces unless it's a really complex model, and then I'll optimize for less distortion. But all of the default things here are totally fine. We want to scale uniformly, and we want to stack everything in the bounding box. And then if we hit project, boom. Now what it's done is it's laid out, it's calculated and created a new UV map and laid it out in a way that all of the different UV shells are not overlapping and more or less evenly distributed within the 1 by 1 square of our UV tile. So now that that's done, I could take this UV snapshot again and take it into Photoshop and paint just the parts that I know I'm actually wanting to paint and not overlapping on top of each other. So that's the basics for UV. If you are unsure with, and you can see actually here, you can see actually here if we select different parts of the shell, how this has been cut up. And if you're unsure of how this is going to look, how a model of yours is going to look, I would suggest starting with the automatic UV, and then from there work. If you have any issues, let me know, and we can work on doing unwrapping to help you out that way, help you out with that. The next part of the video, I'm going to go over the basic UI and everything for Substance Painter, and then I'm going to put together a material set for this rocket. So stay tuned.